You can have the hot seat.
Right.
Great.
Actually, something very strange happened on Friday. I was working in the food bank, and we had some of these flyers with my face on. And one of our regular customers picked it up and he said, Richard, can you sign this for me? And I decided to play it very cool, as if this sort of happens to me all the time. And I sort of, it's, to Jack from Richard, okay, But I realized, gosh, it's taken me 60 years, and someone has asked for my autograph. He might have been taking a mick, mind you. But if anyone does want to queue up for a selfie with me afterwards, then I would feel that my life was totally made up then.
Okay, excellent. All right, so I just want to set the scene and tell you how we got to this and why this was something that I wanted to do. Richard's been part of our church for many years, and I've known some of this story. And we went through an interview process for a site manager, and in that process, we asked Richard some questions. It became very clear to us that wasn't the right role for Richard, but that there was something else that we felt God was leading us into. So we interviewed him again, and Richard has volunteered for the food bank for a number of years, and in that time, we have seen a growth and an exhibition of a remarkable sense of grace and patience and love for the characters and the individuals and the different stories that people come with. We have upwards of 250, 300 different people come every week asking for help, asking for food. We're going to explore that a little bit more tonight. We'll explore that a little bit more tomorrow night in our church meeting. And in that interview process, I was asking some very difficult questions. Some of you will know that I've got a bit of reputation for asking difficult questions. We will put the phone number up if you want to ask Richard a question, but we may not get through them all, and I will try not to ask him any very difficult questions. But in that process, Richard used a phrase, and he talked about looking at many of the individuals that we try to support, and he said it could have been me. And then in talking about tonight, there's this phrase, there but for the grace of God. And I Googled where that phrase comes from, and the answer is nobody knows. Some people think it is from St. Francis of Assisi. Things are either the Bible or Shakespeare, but it's neither Bible or Shakespeare. But it's rooted in these scriptures. And this is Paul talking about himself. He says, I'm the least of the apostles and do not even deserve to be called an apostle because I persecuted the church of God. Now, one of the things that I've championed for many years is the great tragedy of religion, that we believe in God's mercy and forgiveness for ourselves and act as if it doesn't exist for anybody else. And that religious people's reputation is one of condemnation and rebuke. And some of you will know that I have a pile of stones in my office to remind me not to throw them. And Paul was a murderer, as was David, as was Moses. And yet religious people struggle to deal with people who've made poor and difficult choices. And I'm going to ask Richard about some of the difficult things that have happened. And Paul says, but by the grace of God, I am what I am. And his grace to me was not without effect. In other words, what transforms us is grace, not condemnation. That is the message of Jesus. It is mercy and grace that changes people. And in the next letter that Paul writes, he said, my grace is sufficient for you. God speaking to him about his weakness. For my power is made perfect in weakness. So with that backdrop to that phrase, there but for the grace of God go I, let me ask, we're going to start with some very simple, straightforward questions. Where did you go to school?
I went to Arthur Terry School.
All right.
Very local to here.
Okay, so you grew up in Sutton. Tell us just a sentence about your family, mum, dad, siblings.
Yes, I had, mum and dad, and my brother Julian, who's a couple of years older than me, and is all the things that I'm not. Very bright, very gifted, and a lot nicer than me, actually, generally. But we're a family that where I was taught to have a respect for religion in the way that you have a respect for the royal family or things like that, but that it wasn't something for us. It was all about robes and rituals and things like that. It wasn't anything sort of real. And so I didn't have a Christian background at all, although they were very good and moral people. There was also a very stiff upper lip where you didn't talk about problems. There were no problems because you didn't talk about them, so that was fine.
And tell us then about how God came into your life.
Well, it's not at all dramatic, but it's a gradual process. I think one of the first time I heard the gospel message was when the Gideons came into school and gave us all a Bible, and back when probably I was about 14, and I then started wandering into the Christian Union at school, particularly because it was somewhere you could go at lunchtime when it was raining outside. And me and my friend were probably intent on causing trouble, really, rather than saving our souls. But what really struck me was that the guy from British Youth for Christ, John Brewster, who was there, was sort of just like me. He was wearing holy jeans and drinking out of a can and perched on the side of it. It wasn't church as I imagined it at all. It was absolutely relevant, down-to-earth Christianity. Another factor, moving on a little bit, was Frank Cole and the team from Duke Street Chapel knocking on my best friend's door to invite us to Mission England in 1984. That was another of these many stepping stones on the way to me coming to faith. And finally, at the end of that year, I said the prayer and gave my life to Jesus. But I would say I only let him sort of in the reception area.
In the hall. He was in the hall of your life.
He was in the hall.
And what age were you?
But luckily, that was 20.
Okay.
20. And but luckily, the Lord had been very, very patient over the last 4 decades, and and has slowly encroached on other rooms as well.
Great. So let's. I want to ask you, and just tell us what you feel comfortable in telling us about your first marriage, maybe the circumstances or what happened with that. Whatever you feel comfortable in telling us about.
Yeah. Well, I was in a relationship which probably was coming to an end, if I'm really honest, my girlfriend then announced that she was having a baby, and I remember I didn't really eat for about 7 days. I just, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I I think the decision to get married was very much on this feeling of I've got to put a family together for this child. Also, my mother was in sort of last months of her life with cancer at the time, and was the thought, if we're going to get married, she could come to the wedding if we did it now. So all sorts of reasons that are not great reasons to make a life decision, and the result was that we were. And I mean, we can laugh together now. It's sort of 30 years on. I saw her last weekend, and we had acknowledged we were totally unsuited. It was never going to work. Yet, and so it's no surprise that a couple of years later on, by which time we had 2 children, we were in a very bitter, difficult divorce situation, and fighting over things to do with the children in particular. And I came out of that actually thinking, I just feel like I've been to hell and back. I could never talk to people who were in a similar situation, particularly with children involved. I could never advise people or help people, or I'd never want to go there again. It was just too painful. And then sort of a few decades later on, I run divorce recovery workshop, and it's exactly what I do. But it's great because because I've been there, I know what that is like.
And we'll come back to that in a little while. But just also, can you, again, whatever you feel comfortable in sharing, what around this time was your relationship with alcohol?
Well, that takes me back to probably my mid-20s, and I was working in advertising, and tremendously insecure and anxious, and I had a very secret bad relationship with alcohol, and it's something that I've never really admitted to people, or even unpacked probably to myself, let alone anyone else. But
until this moment.
It's okay, they're all friends, I hope. Yes, it was a very secretive, very bad habit that was not going to end well. And interestingly, it's quite dramatic. I was in church one night, and a lady younger than me, who's still part of our church, came to the front in the service, and she said, I've had a word from the Lord. There's someone in this church who's looking into a bottle, and the Lord says he's going to need to smash that bottle, and it's going to be painful, but he wants you to know that he's with you and that it's going to be all right. And within about 2 days of that, I was rushed into hospital with pancreatitis, and having operations, and I was very, very ill. After that, I certainly had to modify my relationship. I don't completely abstain, but I'm very respectful of alcohol.
And tell us, so all this period, these are things these 2 difficult experiences happened after you'd become a Christian.
Yeah.
So what was your relationship with church and God like through these moments? So you talked to me a lot about shame.
Yeah, these were things that I didn't really share. Well, I didn't share at all within the church at that time. And my divorce in particular, I could have got so much help from church, I'm sure. However, my perception as a young person was being full of shame. I'd been married on this stage, and lots of people had come along and were all so happy for me. And now I was a disaster zone. I felt ashamed, and I also felt that everyone in the church had perfect lives, perfect marriages. Everything in the garden was rosy. All I could see was perfect families. How would they be able to help me? I would only bring a stain on the beautiful whiteness of everyone else.
So you would come, sit at the back,
Yeah.
slip in, slip out.
Or not come at all.
Or not come at all.
Yeah.
And that went on for some years?
Yes, well, particularly when I was going through that time.
So what began to bring you through that into a different relationship with grace?
I think, in particular, it was realizing that the church is a place for broken people, for people with needs. And also realizing that in terms of what we do within the church, we need to talk more. We need to be more, accessible to people. We need to be more welcoming of people, as Jesus was, of people who have needs and brokenness in their lives. So it was that process of realization and coming a lot more up to date. Certainly, I wanted. You always champion things that you could have done with when you were younger, and divorce recovery most definitely would have been a great help to me, to be amongst people who were Christians but had been through the same thing would have been very, very valuable to me. And
so let's jump to that. Yeah. We'll come back to how you got there, but let's jump to. So tell us about divorce recovery. What do you see happening in divorce recovery? What's your experience of it?
Well, it's very much the power of bringing people together who are in a similar situation, who become a lovely, supportive community to one another. But I realized early on that people are never going to get the answers they want. They're never going to get even. They're certainly never going to win. It's a very broken situation. Yet, through the miracle of sort of grace and forgiveness, there is a way in which that can be transcended. Going to a bit of an extreme, it's similar to situations between countries. When you look at, say, Israel and Gaza, or what has happened in South Africa or Northern Ireland, you get these absolutely insurmountable, bitter, difficult situations. Yet, there is a chance through truth, reconciliation, and the miracle of forgiveness and a lot of prayer, that these things can be transcended. It's an amazing thing, and we do see it again and again.
So we'll come back to prayer, but let's go back a little bit more on your story. So you're working in advertising.
Yeah.
You're beginning to rebuild a life and sort of deal with the shame that you felt, and you make a big career change. So tell us what you do and what job you take and what that was about.
One of the really good things about being brought very low, as I was after my divorce, was that you have a mindset of rather, what's the worst that can happen? And you're a bit less risk averse
because already
you're
happened.
Comfortable.
Yeah.
And I had joined a group called Spice, which is a group for people, mainly single people, who want to do lots of things they wouldn't otherwise do and meet lots of people they wouldn't otherwise meet. A big social group. And one day in 1996, a little slip of paper dropped out of the magazine that used to come through every month from Spice, saying that the group was for sale, the West Midlands group. And I just knew at that moment that that is what I really wanted to do. I wanted to run a Spice group. And it seemed just so much more meaningful than anything that I'd done before. Certainly more meaningful than advertising, which was generally about trying to subvert things. Certainly, I didn't feel I was doing much positive good in the world. And so I borrowed some money from my dad and my brother and made it happen. And in fact, Maggie, who worked for 20 years in Spice, has come along tonight, so I have to be careful what I say.
So for those that don't really, so what were you doing in Spice, and why did you feel it made a difference? What was the significance of it? And you did it for 25, how many years?
Just over 20 years.
Just over 20 years. So what difference did it make to people, do you think?
You're bringing people together, people from... it was a tremendous pride that we had people of all ages, all adult ages anyway, all walks of life. We had professional people and we had people who were unemployed. We had a tremendous mix of people, and people were encouraged to challenge themselves in different ways, getting out into the outdoors, doing all sort of adventure-type activities, and a lot of social things together. And we also very much tried to create quite a caring community of people who looked out for one another, and who would always be looking for the person who was on their own and trying to bring them in, quite a caring community, which I loved. I loved that. And I certainly loved seeing people who, of course, when you're dealing with people who are on the whole single, they've often come from a situation of a broken relationship or bereavement, and actually seeing these people sort of abseiling down cliffs or, doing what they've always wanted to do and challenging themselves, and it is tremendous, yeah.
So God's rebuilding you. You met Kate and married again, and Freddie and Seb.
And so I learned a lot. I learned a lot about people, an awful lot about people, and it was incredibly hard work. My now wife, Kate, scarcely saw me for 20 years. It's dreadful for her now, actually, that that I'm back on the scene again. But because we were running well over 100 events every month, I was trying to recruit at least 100 new members every month to because of the turnover that you have in a group like that. We built it up to 3,500 members at one time, before the internet changed everything, and it was far easier to do what we were doing. And
what made you give it up? What effect was it having on you?
Well, it was fantastic, and I rafted the Grand Canyon twice, Great Wall of China, I breathed fire, I did scuba diving, and all sorts of things. I ticked off many bucket lists. It was fantastic. But my predecessor had said to me, "You will know when it's time to move on." And it was the relentlessness of this sort of being on duty 24/7, and it's like being pursued by a pack of dogs, always, every month. What's new? What's new? What have you found? What new events are there? What's the new thing? And one day at about 2 a.m. when I was trying to get a newsletter finished, I just sort of collapsed on the floor, and I had what was really a sort of mini breakdown. And I thought, no, this is the time. This is when the pain has become more than the pleasure, and I need to move on and pass it on to someone else. So that's what happened, really.
So you sold up. Would you say you retired?
Yes.
You didn't have anything else to do. Let's put it that way.
I didn't have anything else to do.
What then?
Yeah, I mean, it was strange because the bad thing was that I left Spice not having anything that I wanted automatically to go on to. In fact, I carried on going into the Spice office for quite a long time, so I couldn't think of anything else to do except help the guy who now ran it. And then I had a few months where I really enjoyed having time back, and just being able to go and do things I wanted to do. But after literally a few months, it actually became quite depressing. I felt a real lack of purpose in life. And that's when I started getting involved in other things, and came and knocked on your door and said, "What can I do?"
What can I do? And you did, I think you did just a discipleship year. That's when we started with divorce recovery. And Sutton Pastors. Tell us about Sutton Pastors.
Well, this was probably the first thing that I remember doing at that time. And that was very much by accident. I was in church, sitting next to my son Fred, and Frank Cole was talking about the work of Sutton pastors who go out into Sutton on a Saturday evening, looking after the drinkers and keeping people safe. And I whispered to Fred, "This is exactly what the church should be doing. It should be out there with people." To which, of course, Fred then said, "So are you going to volunteer?" Damn. And so a few Saturdays later, I found myself going out with Frank with the yellow tabard on, and I remember thinking to myself beforehand and saying to God, I have nothing to offer these people. I don't relate to these people who go drinking in Sutton on a Saturday night. I really don't feel I have anything to offer these people. But of course, before we go out, we have a time of prayer saying, Lord, that dangerous prayer where you say, Lord, use me. And we went out, and towards the end of the evening, it was quite the typical sight of a girl struggling in big high heels, dressed like she was on the beach in Ibiza, although it was cold. She stumbled up to me, and she said, I need to tell you. She said, I've got ketones in my wee. And she said, I feel I've got to tell you this. I've got ketones in my wee. I've got a problem. And I said, well, actually, I can help you with that. Come and sit down, because I was on a course last week. I'm a type 1 diabetic, learning all about ketone acidosis.
I have no idea what a keto is. I don't think I want to know.
I know. and so I was able to sit her down and talked about it all, and how important it was that acids were eating up her insides if she didn't get help, and that she needed to persist with the doctors and things like that. And afterwards, I remember just sort of looking up to the big full moon that was in the sky that last night, and it was so apparent. It was like God was just having a little chuckle to himself and saying, "You said you had nothing to offer these people," you know. Just sort of very random. But that is a theme over and over again in what I've been doing, really. This. Yeah.
And you volunteered to help serve in the food bank. Tell us about what you felt at the beginning and what you expected and what.
Yeah, again, a lot of people coming in who, on the face of it, looked quite sort of rough and scary and unkempt, and so my initially I was just sort of handing out the food and ticking their names off, and but very quickly it developed from that to I think what I felt very early on was it was like you're looking into people's soul, and everyone, however they may present, being just a little bundle of fragile humility, and people would open up and tell their stories. And I remember one of the first people who asked me to pray for him, and he was quite a scary-looking guy, actually, and he would, as soon as he got talking to me, in no time he would be in floods of tears. He had the most awful time caring for his wife, and all sorts of associated difficulties. And I remember praying for him, and I said, and Lord, we bring before you. And then I thought, can't remember his wife's name. And I thought, he's got it tattooed on his neck. So quickly sort of sneaked a peek. Sheila, that's it, Sheila. But I did find, these were people who, on the whole, were just like me. People with alcohol problems, people with divorce problems, people with all sorts of issues. And so certainly I felt I really, after a time, related to that group of people. And in fact, I'm much more comfortable talking to that group of people than I would be talking to a group of professional type people who I'm sure wouldn't be anything like as open with me. And
why do you pray?
The vast majority. Well,
how did that happen? How did you first pray? Can you remember? And why did you start praying with people?
Firstly, because they would ask for it, but when you talk to people, invariably something will come up that's in their life. It may be health, it might be a job interview, whatever it may be an addiction. And so in most cases, there is something that prompts you to say, can I pray for you? And what really surprised me was that probably 95% of people really, really appreciated that. There wasn't any resistance at all, and many people would tell me, how much it had helped them. Yeah.
And tell us the story about the guy in the car park.
Oh yeah, that was quite recent actually. I was I had to come back after we had closed the food bank at the end of the day, and there was a guy who arrived late, and he was an alcoholic, and I knew him quite well. And I went and got him a bag, and had a chat with him outside, and I said, "Can I say a prayer for you?" And he said, "Yeah, of course, but I don't want a normal prayer." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, I want one of your tingly prayers." And well, I decided not to try and explain that it was nothing to do with me whether they tingled or not. But I prayed for him, and I said, "Did you get the tingles?" He said, "Yeah, got the tingles." So that was quite a special moment, yeah.
And so we'll draw towards a close. But what would you say to someone who might have been you 20 years ago, 30 years ago, who maybe struggles with shame, struggles with thinking God could ever use them?
I think the very important thing to me was, firstly, that realization that the church is absolutely relevant to everyone, and that Jesus is absolutely relevant to all of us, and that it's a place for people with needs. It's one of the most basic tenets in the Bible is caring for other people, feeding people, visiting people, loving people, and that is really just so important. This vision of us being a sort of shining light on the hill and people coming to us with needs is exactly where I think we're called to be. And I would say that if you look at the people in the Bible who God uses, they are invariably rough around the edges. They're people like, David, as you mentioned, which some people would simperingly refer to as the sweet psalmist of Israel, and but on the other hand, he committed adultery, he murdered a guy. He wasn't he wasn't someone who came in purity, but whilst he didn't come with a pure heart, he came with a true heart, and that is what God can use. And if you ask God to use you, he does.
And the story isn't, of course, that these things are a great way of... It's not that you would advise people to live the life you've led. It's that God transforms through grace, that he rebuilds and restores.
Grace is the key to all of this. It's the key to it. Grace is what we see in divorce recovery. It's in the food bank. And the food bank is all about grace. What a wonderful thing to offer compassion without judgment. Compassion without judgment, that is just fabulous.
And it changes lives.
It changes lives, yes.
So just tell those who don't know something of your role now, or your aspiration. You're 2 months into it, 3 months into it. What are we releasing you to do?
Okay. So my role has come out of it's this concept of people on the margins, and the priority within that is the people who are already coming into the church for the food bank. So building on that work in terms of how we can further help those people. So I mean, one thing that is a huge issue within our food bank community is addictions. Alcohol in particular, I mean, it cuts across ill health, inability to work, domestic violence, family breakup, a whole raft of things, crime, of course, that bring people into those situations. And in a very short time, we'll be launching something called the Recovery Course, which is a 12-step program, which is tackling any addictions. I imagine the major one being alcohol, which we're offering to the food bank community at the moment.
And with that course, and one of the things that we have come to understand is that we can't fix things, but we can introduce people to Jesus who makes a difference. And it's not that it's not like you're a social worker. It's more you walk with people and say, come to this, come to that.
Yes, I've learned that I'm very rarely able to fix any problems, but talking to people, praying with people, introducing people, signposting, all those sort of areas are transformative. And so I'm really looking forward to developing all those areas further.
And you're part of our team for Alpha, and we've seen folks
absolutely
make that next step.
I mean, it's funny that I would have never thought that my life would have ended up in a direction where I seem to be spending a lot of time with people at very low points in their life, sometimes the lowest points in their life. And another area that dominated the last 2 years before taking up the role with the church was funerals in different ways. Firstly as a funeral celebrant, then as a funeral arranger, and then most recently manning the phones for a funeral business at a weekend. And
how did you get into that? I mean, we've probably got a lot of time now, but that's an odd job to try out.
Well, yes.
Why did you do that?
Well, I used, of course, having had many thousands of people had been associated with spice, and unfortunately some of them die off, and I get invited every so often to speak at funerals, and someone suggested to me that I could actually do that as a funeral celebrant, and I did the course. So it all came out of that, but it again brought me a whole lot of experience in being with people at difficult times, yes, that last period when I was manning the phones, I was literally getting calls from people, just after a death had occurred, and being with people in those very tragic situations, and it was a tremendous training for me, but also very, very satisfying. When I trained as a funeral celebrant, they did say to me, "Would you also like to do weddings?" And I immediately said, "No." I couldn't quite. Couldn't quite imagine wanting to be part of those sort of happy, joyous occasions. But there is something incredibly humbling, poignant, and satisfying in holding someone's hand through a very difficult time in their life.
How do you cope with that? How do you not lie awake every night worrying about these people? I mean, we encounter a tremendous suffering daily in the office, don't we, with people? How do you deal with that?
I know that when I was working as a funeral celebrant, sometimes you'd have to say to yourself, this is not my grief, this is their grief. I am here to support them, and if I allow myself to be sucked too far into their grief, I won't be able to support them. And I think it's a similar thing. You have to have a division. I mean, to have been many cases in the food bank where I've had to sort of take 5 minutes. I remember a lady saying that she asking my advice because she'd been asked by her 2 grandchildren how she should answer a question they had asked. Did Mummy mean to kill herself when she took all those tablets? You know, those sorts of very, very difficult situations. And yeah, you just have to. I don't know. You can't allow yourself to be sucked so deeply that you're not able to function and help people. Yeah.
But I think you're in exactly the right place, and all the different things of your life have weaved together and intertwined and used now, and I hope that's an encouragement to others, that wherever we might feel in terms of brokenness or shame, God, when we say to God, here I am, use me, you say it's a dangerous prayer, I think it's a brilliant prayer, because that's the way we get rebuilt. When we offer ourselves to God.
Absolutely.
I'm going to hand over to Sam just to help us respond together for a little while in worship and grace together. Do you want me to pray, Sam, or do you want to pray? I'll pray. Let's stand together. Father, we thank you that you're the God who restores, rebuilds. You're the God of new life, of fresh starts. You're the God of mercy. You're the God of salvation. You're the God of transformation. You're the God who takes what is broken and despised, what is dirty and unclean, and you make it new again. We thank you for your work in Richard, past and present. We thank you that the same God who has worked in Richard's life is knocking on each one of our hearts and asking that we might allow him to use us to bring grace into a broken world. Amen.